today and for sticking around for my presentation, as it is the third one here. My name is Mont, and I'm currently a junior at Emmanuel College in Boston. I study political science and economics, and this is my paper, a study of water diplomacy, liquid alliances. So first I'll start off with a little bit of what we're going to go over today. First, we're going to define what water diplomacy is, then we're going to jump into our research question, then our methodology. Then the paper employs 2 case studies. We're going to talk about both of those, and then we're going to wrap up with a conclusion. So first, what is water diplomacy? Well, water diplomacy was defined by Susan Scheimer at the Global Water Forum in 2018 as the use of diplomatic instruments to manage shared water resources and address water-related conflicts to promote stability. And that uses the same general categories or pillars as you can see in international water law, such as equitable and reasonable utilization and no significant harm. Now, an example of what water diplomacy really means to us, to put it into context, can be seen from Scheimer in 2020 and from Vish et al. In 2020, where they discuss the Indus Water Valley Treaty between India and Pakistan. So, to go over the conflict, India and Pakistan were at conflict, but they were also discussing what to do with the Indus Water Valley. India was looking to fish in it, and Pakistan was looking to dump in it, and there was a conflict there. So, the World Bank brought in experts from India and from Pakistan on sustainability and fishery rights, and those experts worked to create a river basin organization. And because they've created such a successful river basin organization, it went up the chain, and those relationships were converted into diplomatic efforts, which really helped cause a stoppage in conflict. That's the basis of classical water diplomacy. So the paper looks at limitations then. And in one of the limitations it looks at in the literature is that classical water diplomacy is between contiguous states, meaning states that are directly in contact with each other and share a transboundary water resource. They also mostly look at states that are currently at hot conflict, where diplomatic solutions at a grassroots level could help solve a greater geographical dispute at a more high level. So then, herein lies the research question. Can the United States, a state that does not share a contiguous border with another state in which we currently dispute a transboundary water resource, still achieve the same outcomes that classical water diplomacy can on a global stage? The hypothesis is that indeed it can, and it is actually doing that, and it has been for a long time through NGOs inadvertently and advertently through US aid and other aid organizations. The paper specifically analyzes this in North Africa and the Middle East. And the thesis is that this term water partnership diplomacy, in which the paper coins, describes how the research has neglected to see USAID and NGOs as part of water diplomacy and why it should be part of the literature. So we'll go on to the methodology. So first, we wanted to look at a way to scale water diplomacy, and we wanted to look at something that would have the similar outcomes that water diplomacy has. So we looked at soft power, and specifically how soft power and US foreign policy objectives align with the goals and outcomes of classical water diplomacy, which they align very well. And the first is that USAID currently has the goal, or did have the goal, of improving living conditions through clean water and sanitation, which is the same as the grassroots classical water diplomacy. They also strengthen local institutions for sustainable resource management, again, a key pillar of classical water diplomacy. And lastly, they build trust and cooperation for long-term stability and conflict mitigation, which is the final goal of water diplomacy and those river basin organizations. Next, the paper also looks at nonprofits and NGOs, such as EcoPeace Middle East and the work that the New England Aquarium is doing through their MCAV program. And it compares that to the soft power initiatives that the USAID is doing, and we still see that these nonprofit groups and NGOs, they're inadvertently achieving the same soft power outcomes for the United States in its foreign policy, and therefore are also can be included in this water partnership diplomacy framework. So first we'll go over the case studies. We've chosen the Jordan River Basin and Egypt and the Nile for this paper. First, a brief history of the Jordan River Basin conflict. The key points here is in 1955, the conflict between Israel, Jordan, and Palestine over the Jordan River Valley as a shared transboundary water resource was addressed in the Johnston Plan, which was an attempt at classical water diplomacy, and it was rejected by the Arab League, but it was accepted by experts in water. Then, in 1977, they actually established the Jordan Valley Authority, which built on the Johnston Plan, but was accepted by regional actors, and actually is a river basin organization and achieves the exact conclusion of classical water diplomacy. We're going to contrast that with the USAID soft power framework. So the Jordan River Valley Authority uses experts from the area, and they work with companies and institutional partners from all three countries. That's how they create those connections. USAID partners with the JVA and individual actors like Jordan and Israel and those companies within Jordan, such as Aquaba, and they actually create these solutions at a grassroots level and achieve the same outcomes that the JVA is achieving. We can also see this through nonprofits such as EcoPeace Middle East, who are achieving the exact same policy outcomes as classical water diplomacy. It specifically states that they're trying to, they're working with the goal of no significant harm, which is again a key pillar of both international water law and classical water diplomacy frameworks. And they're achieving foreign policy outcomes for the United States inadvertently through their connections with US research institutions and building connections with US Congress and other funding mechanisms. Even though they're not outright a US institution, they're still working very closely in achieving policy goals. Next, we're going to look at Egypt and the Nile. So a brief background on this conflict that's continuously emerging. Ethiopia, which is upstream on the Nile from Egypt, is creating a dam, the GRE dam project, and it's estimated this is one of the most highly tense geopolitical situations, as Ethiopia sees it as necessary to create a green energy future for their economy. But Egypt requires this water for agriculture as well as clean drinking water downstream. And the dam will obviously lighten water pressure downstream, creating water scarcity. So USAID has been working with Egypt for a long time to try to increase the threshold for conflict in the region. 25 million Egyptians now have clean water access because of the wells and the interconnectedness that USAID is bringing to the region. They're physically bringing infrastructure as well as technical assistance support programs and partnering with the Egyptian Water Authority to do this, to create a higher threshold that's needed to actually achieve violence. Think of it as this. If you're a citizen and you don't have access to clean drinking water, you're much more likely to go to your provincial government and demand access to that water and create conflict. But if you have access to clean water, you're much less likely to go to your government and demand more water access. And that's the increased threshold that we're looking for. That's the same goals that classical water diplomacy has, but it's being achieved proactively through water partnership diplomacy. Also, in Egypt, the Egyptian Water Partnership is partnering with EU countries as well and providing technical assistance programs through them. That goes to show that this is not just the United States that can achieve water partnership diplomacy. Any actor can, and as long as it's achieving their foreign policy outcomes. And other actors are, such as the EU and such as China. Also, local institutions, with NGOs and USAID partnership, are working to buy conventional time again and raise that threshold for violence, creating the same policy outcomes and solutions as classical water diplomacy. Finally, we highlighted the current challenges with classical water diplomacy in the literature. We also demonstrated how an analysis of soft power can reflect the same goals and positive outcomes as water diplomacy. And we used case studies of Jordan and the Middle East, Jordan and Egypt in North Africa and the Middle East, to provide context for why the water partnership diplomacy framework applies. Lastly, I'll conclude with this. There's 592 transboundary riparian water elements in the world today. And that means that there's a possibility of 592 conflicts over transboundary water resources. But the water partnership diplomacy framework provides us a way that has been historically precedent
that we can go about trying to mitigate these conflicts before they spark and raise the threshold for violence. Thank you very much.